They are some of the world's most notorious serial killers.
He was like a god when he had a corpse as his plaything.
But were these psychopaths born evil, or did their mothers make them into monsters? I'm Donald McIntyre, and I'm on a quest to explore how some of history's most horrific murderers were molded by their dysfunctional relationships with their mothers.
When it comes to people who are pathological, psychopathic, the influence of the mother is absolutely dominant.
I'll be piecing together events in their childhoods and talking to criminologists and psychologists to try to understand what motivated their monstrous crimes.
We had never come across a serial killer who'd killed that many people.
In this program, Adam Lanza, the lone gunman from the Sandy Hook massacre. In 2012, he shot his mother 4 times in the head before storming a Connecticut elementary school where he gunned down 6 adults and 20 innocent young children. Was it his first victim, his mother, who paved his path to murder?
She was the one person in his life who did the most harm to him in not getting him the help he needed.
He wanted to be number one, the number one mass shooter. He wanted people to remember him.
Armed and merciless, spree killers become infamous by turning their anger and resentment into deadly rampage. How could anyone open fire on a group of 20 young school children? Ultimately, what caused Adam Lanza to commit one of the most senseless massacres in American criminal history? On the 14th of December 2012, Adam Lanza committed one of the world's most shocking spree shootings at the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut.
Police have said that they thought the Sandy Hook shooting was a well-planned attack by Adam Lanza. He pulled up to the school, dressed in his military gear, heavily armed. He blasted his way into the school, and within minutes, he was going through classrooms and gunning down children.
Within 11 minutes of entering the school, Lanza had taken the lives of 6 teaching staff and 20 first graders.
He walked past the older children to the younger children. Why? Because they're totally defenseless.
After discharging 152 bullets, Lanza took his own life. When police raided his home, they found that he had killed his mother as she slept, shooting her 4 times in the head.
Adam Lanza was the Hurricane Sandy of terrible tragedy.
He was this isolated kid who no one really paid much attention to until December 14th.
He had a dark obsession, and he wanted to do what he did, but he also wanted a way out. He took 27 other innocent people with him, which, is absolutely unspeakable.
What was the spark that ignited this terrible, fatal frenzy on that morning of December 14th, 2012? And who's to blame for the creation of Adam Lanza, one of America's most shocking spree shooters? To find out, we have to look back to his early childhood. Adam was born in 1992 to Father Peter and Mother Nancy in New Hampshire. The Lanza household was a loving one, and Nancy's focus was firmly set on her 2 sons, Ryan and Adam.
Those 2 kids were her first priority in life, and she's absolutely one of the best moms I ever knew.
But Nancy had a very particular approach to life.
Nancy was a perfectionist. Everything Nancy did, she did perfectly right. Whenever she wrote me emails, everything, the syntax, spelling was always right on. If I screwed up and misspelled something, she'd call me on it. So, don't you know how to spell Mississippi? So.
But not all was perfect with Adam.
As early as 3 years old, Adam was diagnosed with developmental issues. He wasn't communicating with his peers. He wasn't communicating well with his family. One of the people he was having trouble communicating with was his mother. He didn't show her affection. He rarely smiled. He didn't give her kisses. He didn't give her hugs. And that was troubling to Nancy.
As with all children at this age, Adam was professionally assessed to check on his progress.
It was in this Birth to 3 program that the flags were raised, that there were issues involving his progress. And they assessed him. They found that he had anxiety.
Adam didn't seem to not meet motor milestones like walking and being toilet trained. But when language should have been put in place, expressive and receptive language, there were problems.
He had developed his own language. When he was being tested by clinicians early on, his mother was the one who was trying to interpret his language.
Adam was also exhibiting some physical symptoms that indicated he may have some issues.
He was banging his head against the wall and against desks, and he was showing signs of frustration.
But was this a sign of serious problems?
Head banging is not that uncommon. Temper tantrums is not that uncommon. Having behavioral problems early on in preschool and in elementary school is really not that uncommon.
Adam's symptoms did perhaps suggest that he had some early developmental issues, but it wasn't until he was a little bit older that they became more obvious and extreme.
By the time Adam Lanza is 5, his deficits are becoming much more noticeable.
Adam didn't like to be touched. You know, you don't shake his hand, you don't tousle his hair, you don't pat his back and say, "Attaboy."
His parents want answers, so they take him for an independent, private neurological assessment. He was diagnosed with expressive problems, obsessive-compulsive disorder.
But what effect did this diagnosis have on the young Adam?
Adam was being pulled out of his regular class, and we all know that children who are put into special ed are stigmatized. So here is Adam, he's got deficits in his competency. He's also socially withdrawn, and now he's being socially isolated.
But there was one social activity that Adam seemed to enjoy. He attended Cub Scouts with his mother, Nancy, and it was here where he first came into contact with firearms.
We would go shooting. At the Cub Scout weekend, kids learned how to shoot .22s. It wasn't just the 7-year-olds shooting .22s. Now the 3 or 4-year-olds were there too, and so I had an air rifle for them. I didn't feel comfortable putting a .22 in a 4-year-old's hand.
There are a lot of people that have opinions about children having firearms, but in some of the rural areas, it's sort of a way of life, and it's sort of seen as sport.
In my family, target shooting was considered a normal thing. I did that regularly with my kids.
For Adam, target practice with his mom, Nancy, would become a favorite hobby.
Adam loved shooting with us. His mother was there. He felt safe, and it was fun. He was such a little boy that he had a hard time holding the rifle. But after a few tries, he got the hang of it, and I thought, this kid's a natural.
Were Lanza's communication problems really a cause for concern? And did his early introduction to firearms contribute to the terrible events that were to come? Liz, if we're looking at Adam Lanza as a young child, his early years, there's some concern about some behaviours.
It's kind of flagged up at this point that he's having issues communicating. So his mum's having to kind of translate for him. The evaluator can't really understand what he's saying, but that's nothing unusual in itself. Lots of children of that age make up words and noises and that kind of thing.
No, I've had that with my own children. They've their own language, and it's just kind of normal behaviour.
I think what stands out as significant for me is the role of his mum in sort of constructing some of these ideas about him. So she's the one that's speaking for him. She's his advocate. And I think that's a pattern that she follows throughout his childhood.
She's complaining that he's repeatedly banging his head at home, he doesn't touch. But in school, the teachers report him and observe him to be friendly and bright, with good social language ability and a good sense of humour. These seem like two different people, but this is one independently observed by the teachers and the other reported by mother.
There's a real contrast there, isn't there? And I think that becomes quite interesting in the years to come.
So he's introduced to firearms extraordinarily for anybody in this side of the pond, you know, at the Cub Scouts. But that's their normal. What troubles you about her fostering such a strong interest in guns at this stage?
She's essentially sort of setting up an idea of what it is to be a normal boy, to be a normal man. That's very much come from Nancy's background of living in that state and growing up with those cultural beliefs around firearms. It's a young lad who's engaging in an activity that lots of families in that part of the US engage in. So there's no real warning signs at the moment.
Coming up, Nancy Lanza tells friends and family that she's got a terminal illness and doesn't have long to live. But this claim appears to be completely fabricated.
She was making up stories to help her get the kind of emotional support she wanted.
On Friday morning, December 14th, 2012, Adam Lanza shot 4 bullets into his mother's head as she lay in her bed. By 9:30, he was at Sandy Hook Elementary School with just one inexplicable goal on his mind: to kill as many innocent and helpless adults and young school children as possible. What drove this 20-year-old to commit one of America's most heinous spree shootings? And was there anything in his childhood that warned of the terrible events to follow? In 1998, Adam's father, Peter, took a high-powered job that meant the family had to move to Newtown in Connecticut. Did dealing with Adam's condition take a backseat as a result of the move?
The Lanza family were a middle-class people. They were intelligent. His father had a substantial job. You would think that they would be aware of all of the resources.
The problem was that when he went from New Hampshire to Connecticut, those records were never transferred over to Connecticut. So when school officials were dealing with Adam in Connecticut, they didn't really understand what he had gone through in New Hampshire. So there was no way to tell whether he was improving or getting worse.
By not actively pursuing treatment for Adam, was Nancy turning a blind eye to her son's problems?
Many, many parents don't want to see their kids as psychologically disturbed. They want to see it as just an aberration, or he has this problem or that problem, but he's very bright and he'll outgrow it and so on.
Was Nancy in denial of her son's condition, or was she simply distracted by other factors in her life?
Peter Lanza in his new job was working many hours, and Nancy, who was no longer working, was home with the children, and it strained their relationship.
I maintained contact with her through emails. Peter was kind of married to his job. He was kind of a workaholic. So she ended up being a single parent even when she was married, I think.
Nancy has her own emotional issues and anxieties, and Nancy wants to hear more than anything on earth that her son has outgrown these issues and that he's fine.
With her marriage on the rocks, Nancy was beginning to exhibit behavior that suggests she had serious issues of her own.
Nancy Lanza had been telling friends that she had a terminal illness. She was telling them that she only had a certain amount of time to live.
Nancy was obviously feeling a lot of anxiety, but instead of getting help for what were real issues or emotional issues going on for her, she conceptualized it as MS. She had an awful lot going on for her. People like that have a tendency to externalize their problems by acting them out in physical symptoms.
The question was, were these claims of serious illness a cry for help, or was Nancy just seeking sympathy and attention?
Investigators looked into that, and it was never determined that Nancy Lanza actually did suffer from any sort of terminal illness.
She was making up stories to help her get the kind of emotional support she wanted. I get a sense that she was also very isolated, that there was a dyad. It was Nancy and it was her son. And it seemed to get more and more enmeshed and more encapsulated as the years went on.
Nancy has various email exchanges with her old friends in New Hampshire saying that Peter's working incredibly long hours, the job's very demanding, the burden of looking after the kids is very much falling on me.
She's presenting herself as a victim. Now, Peter is perhaps on a salary close to $1 million a year. This is not an underprivileged family. She can get all the help she wants. But Adam's mood, when she gets unhappy, Adam gets unhappy.
At this point in time, when Peter's working long hours, when the relationship appears to be breaking down, the relationship between Adam and his mum becomes quite intense at this point. Adam becomes incredibly dependent upon her.
What does this say about Nancy Lanza that she keeps making these claims of a potentially phantom illness?
Well, when we look at people who are basically fabricating illnesses in themselves, we've got to think about what are they trying to achieve by doing this? Well, by telling somebody something like this, it's very powerful. You're placing yourself in the role as a victim, and you're getting an awful lot of attention and concern and sympathy towards your predicament or your supposed predicament. I think Nancy's somebody who does have to very much be at the centre of other people's attention, other people's concerns.
She is quite a character, Nancy, here. She's manipulating people, it seems, all around her.
She knows the right things to say to the right people at the right time, but she's also very good at keeping people at bay and keeping people away. So that's something that we continue to see as well.
By 2002, Nancy and Peter's marriage had struck a new low, and the couple decided to separate.
I think things started to crumble after that. She started to lose hold of what she wanted to do most, just be a good mother.
In essence, Nancy was raising her two sons in that house alone. And that's a challenge for any parent. But then she had this child who had serious special needs.
She was very private. She kept those things to herself. I think that was an issue with her because when the trouble started later, she didn't reach out to people because that would have been admitting that there was trouble that she couldn't handle.
As his parents' marriage disintegrated, Adam's problems, which had been largely ignored by Nancy, seemed to be getting worse.
When he went into middle school, he started to show signs of anxiety, depression. He was obsessive-compulsive. He was washing his hands all the time.
He had to have his food presented in a certain way. He had a germ-phobic type behavior and he couldn't touch things.
Were Adam's emerging problems in any way related to his mother's issues?
Nancy told me once she felt guilty about some of Adam's problems. She admitted to me that she had a neurotic personality. And she said, I'm afraid that Adam inherited this from me. He's a little bit neurotic like me.
But Adam's difficulties were much more serious, and Nancy was finding it difficult to cope.
Nancy had to deal with those moments with her child. And when she's dealing with him in that moment of his anxiety, a person who might not be as strong might just look to appease that person, to just bring peace for that moment.
She was a perfectionist, and it wasn't allowable for her to have a problem that way. Perfect parents don't have problems with their kids.
But Adam did have problems, though Nancy was not prepared to address them.
A child like Adam needs very clear and very strong limits. But he's not going to like them. What child, normal or otherwise, wants the law to be laid down to them? So she has a child who's difficult to manage. She finds out it's better to give in to him.
It's possible that Nancy didn't want to accept that Adam had a mental health disorder. If he did have something wrong mentally, perhaps it was she who was the driving force behind that.
By now, it's clear that Adam's mother's coping mechanisms were not only perpetuating her son's issues, but were also creating greater problems for Adam. In denial, Nancy was keen to blame others.
One example is an email she sent to the school. At the end of one of the school years, she said, I am hoping that next year Adam will be placed in a classroom with a more casual feel to it. He responds well to a nurturing environment, and I would like his emphasis to be on learning rather than coping. He focuses on his work, enjoys structure, and always adheres to the rules, but a certain level of strictness seems to bring an anxiety and depression.
She said he didn't like structure, he liked support, which basically means leave him alone, because if you try to instill some sort of structure or rules, he may get explosive or may have a temper tantrum. And this is one way to avoid that.
Nancy's desire to control every aspect of Adam's life kept all professional help at bay.
There was ample evidence from the school that there were problems with Adam, but every time they came up against the mother, they really hit a brick wall.
How was Adam affected by his parents' separation? And how did Nancy Lanza's approach to her son's issues cultivate more problems at school? It appears at this stage, following the separation, that Nancy begins to concentrate more on Adam's problems.
Yeah, she's going to the school and she's telling them about the particular needs that he has. She's starting to kind of give him a bit of a label at this point as a child who needs special attention, who needs kind of constant pandering to.
You know, if mother was overly concentrating or enjoying this or magnifying this, to what extent would a kid like Adam follow his mother's narrative?
Well, I think Adam's somebody who is basically trying to please his mum at this point in time, because there's been this upset in the family unit. She's the one kind of constant presence.
So at the moment, the school have really no choice but to engage with the mother, and she's a very persuasive character. And she says he doesn't like being touched, eye contact is difficult, and he has, you know, strange diets and has kind of some behavioural issues. And the school can only take her at her word.
Well, this is the thing. We often do just take mother's word for it when they report particular issues or needs within their children. And we've got to remember that Nancy Lanza is a white, middle-class, wealthy woman, and she's incredibly assertive and she's incredibly domineering. So coming up against somebody like that, you know, even if you did have your doubts as to what she was telling you, it'd be very difficult to challenge her.
Nancy's email contact with the school really tells an awful lot about her.
It does. She says, well, Adam's done okay this year, but you know, perhaps you should have done this for him. He likes things this way. He gets anxious if you don't do this, that, and the other. So she's being quite domineering again. She's saying, these are the needs that my son has, and you should be attending to them. But at the same time, she's not really doing much outside of that, is she?
A normal parent would be kind of seeking support in the community. She could afford extra private health support or analysis.
What's interesting for me at this point in time is what's missing from this picture. There's quite a lot of local support groups, but she really goes out of her way to avoid these groups, and I'm wondering why she's doing that. Is it denial, is it ignorance, or is it something else altogether?
Coming up, 10-year-old Adam writes a storybook about a granny and her son who go on a killing spree.
It was this first big revelation that Adam had these violent tendencies and had these violent thoughts.
On the 14th of December 2012, Adam Lanza committed one of the world's most shocking spree shootings. Heavily armed and dressed in army fatigues, he shot his way into Sandy Hook Elementary School. By 9:40 a.m., he had murdered 20 innocent young school children and 7 adults, including his own mother. Could anything have been done to prevent this fatal rampage? And were there any red flags missed in the build-up to this terrible crime? By the time Adam was 10 years of age, his schoolwork was already revealing a darker side.
Adam, by the time he gets into junior high school, his thoughts and his fantasies are starting to take on a very violent, a very angry, a very paranoid flavor.
And there was one particular piece of homework that should have set alarm bells ringing.
The Big Book of Granny was about this homicidal elderly woman and her son, and they would go around and commit shootings, and in one case, the victims were young children.
Towards the end of Adam's violent storybook, the character Granny is killed by her son.
Granny is the nurturer who is being killed by the person she's nurturing. That's like a chilling rehearsal for what he ultimately did in shooting his mother.
It was this first big revelation that may have showed us our first signs that Adam had these violent tendencies and had these violent thoughts.
But the shocking content of Adam's story was overlooked by his teachers and his mother.
At age 10, if you write stories about killing people and shooting people and all the rest, it should not be rationalized or explained away as creative genius. A normal, well-functioning 10-year-old should not be obsessed with violence, killing, and guns. Should not be. And if they are, that's disturbed.
Even in a normal child that is going through some stress, you have an opening to be able to ask that person, why are you writing this? What's going on for you? What are you thinking?
Could Adam's killing spree have been predicted and prevented if more attention had been paid to his violent stories?
We can't look at just one thing to say that that's the ultimate red flag. But the Book of Granny was a really, really chilling precursor of where Adam Lanza's mind and imagination was going.
One of Adam's interests that featured heavily in the Big Book of Granny was his clear obsession with firearms. He and his mother Nancy had shot together since he was a small boy, and the hobby had become an integral part of their relationship.
Going to the shooting range was something that Nancy did with Adam as a way to bond with him. It was something that they could do where they could actually spend some time together that was positive.
Perhaps the mother was so desperate to see some happiness in Lanza that she did anything just to connect with him at some level.
The appealing thing about shooting a firearm, you're not having to interact with anybody. It's not like playing team sports where you have to consult with your team players. It's you and that gun and the target.
But why did Nancy support Adam's unhealthy and obsessive infatuation with guns and shooting?
Understanding where a parent is coming from when they have a disabled child. They're frustrated, they're fearful. She probably launched onto this herself as something that could give Adam a sense of competence, a sense of being effective.
When you have a child who has these obsessive disorders, that's what I think that raised so many red flags, is that here's Adam Lanza, he has all of these issues, and he's also being exposed to guns.
Nancy Lanza's enabling of her son's unhealthy interest in guns and violence was one of many fatal errors that Nancy Lanza was culpable of.
Liz, it seems to me that there is one big red flag here, the Book of Granny.
There's death within these stories, there's violence within these stories, but it's not the kind of violence that you'd see kids this age writing about.
For example, Dora says, I like hurting people, especially children.
It's quite disturbing, isn't it?
Granny falls out of the boat and Granny's son throws her a cement flotation device, which forces her to sink to the bottom of the lake.
And when we look at stories that children are writing about this age, there is going to be violence in some of them, you know, it's inevitable. But often it's a kind of righteous violence. It's a story of good over evil, but this is something altogether different, and it's incredibly dark.
This was actually binded. This is a parent had read this and had put this together and sent Adam into school with this book. Yeah. So Nancy was fully aware of this.
There's obviously been some adult involvement in putting the text together, in putting the cover on it.
Is Granny Nancy in this world? You know, is this the beginning where we see this love-hate relationship between himself and his own mother?
If we look at both of these situations, the book and the kind of things he's doing outside school, there is that link. So he's writing about guns, he's going to shooting ranges with his mother, and his mum has very much socialised him into that gun culture. Nancy is really very much at the centre of Adam's world at this point in time.
In September 2005, Nancy took the 13-year-old Adam to the emergency room at Danbury Hospital in Connecticut in an attempt to have him signed off school. She reported he was suffering increased levels of anxiety, an unusual complaint for ER. Regardless, the medical staff present attended to Adam.
The nurses and all the personnel on duty were noticing that there was something very, very wrong, very aberrant in this young man's behavior and perhaps in the dynamic with his mother. And this was definitely a situation that required more psychiatric assessment.
The medical professionals decided that Adam needed some help. They felt that he needed to receive further counseling. They wanted him to go on some medication.
But apparently Nancy only wanted a sick note. She didn't want to accept that her son needed urgent psychological help.
Nancy didn't even want to keep him at the hospital. At one point in the visit, she felt that the visit was making him more anxious. So instead of keeping him at the hospital, they actually left.
Was this another missed opportunity to help her son? Reluctant to hand Adam over to the healthcare system, Nancy agreed to take him to a community psychiatrist.
Nancy's belief that she could help Adam more than the clinicians was bolstered by one psychiatrist who she relied heavily on for Adam's treatment. But the question has always been, was that psychiatrist placating Nancy and telling Nancy what she wanted to hear about Adam?
But Adam's father, Peter, was not satisfied with the opinion of the community psychiatrist. He sent Adam to be diagnosed by leading professionals at Yale University's Child Study Center.
He was assessed at Yale, and they really hit the target. And they raised a lot of red flags, and they came in with a recommendation for a very comprehensive treatment program.
That visit was a pivotal moment in Adam's life where this is going to be it. This is the moment where he's going to get the help he needs. He's got an audience of doctors here that see this child as someone who really needs help.
But tragically, Nancy refused to follow doctors' orders.
She was so busy trying to make him happy that she couldn't listen clearly to the people that really could get him to be happy.
That is some of the saddest part of the story, because I firmly believe that there would be a good chance that we would not be talking about Adam Lanza and this tragedy now if that comprehensive treatment plan had been followed.
By the time Adam was 14, Nancy had put a stop to all prescribed medical treatment and therapies. Not only that, she also took the decision to isolate Adam from the education system.
So by 8th grade, she had withdrawn him from school, and he became homeschooled.
She felt he would be calmer in a better environment at home where he could feel more in control, and maybe she could, control the environment as well.
Back at home, isolated from the people he should be with as a teen, he's just in the world that involves Nancy and Adam.
Nancy Lanza, she was an intelligent woman. She'd been dealing with his behavior all his life. I believe deep down, she had an absolute terror that something was drastically wrong, but she couldn't face it.
With Nancy's refusal to pursue therapy or medical treatment for Adam, was he now completely isolated? What's the significance of this visit to ER? I mean, she had problems with Adam, but why take him to ER?
She says he's been suffering with anxiety, he's been washing his hands a lot, look at him, he's hyperventilating. And the doctors take her incredibly seriously. And I don't think she'd anticipated, actually, that the help that would be offered up at that particular point in time. They offered to put all of these things in place for her. And she turns around to them and says, no, it's okay. All I need you to do is to just sign him off school.
She doesn't want the specialist help. She's renouncing it. And this is a pattern we've seen with Nancy, is when she's given opportunity to get experts in, she kind of renounces them or only takes them in when she can manage the situation.
Yeah, I think this has got a little bit out of control for Nancy Lanza at this point in time. She's been offered an awful lot of help, which could be incredibly intrusive. And she's saying, it's okay, I don't want it, all I need is a note.
If she had taken that intervention, then it may have gone down an entirely different path.
It may well have done, but I don't think she wanted to invite that level of scrutiny into Adam's life at that point in time.
It's quite significant with Nancy that she goes to get the answers that she wants to get.
She does find a community psychiatrist who does agree to sign Adam off school for the rest of that academic year. She's now removed him from school, and that's what she wanted to happen here.
The greatest significance is that age 14, this is the end of all significant therapy, medication and intervention for Adam Lanza.
Yeah, this is the end of the road, isn't it? I think any kind of options for further medical treatment have been firmly closed off by his mum.
Coming up, Adam cuts off all contact from those around him, including his own mother, and the virtual world he inhabits becomes increasingly sinister.
He wanted to be number one, the number one mass shooter. He wanted people to remember him.
On the 14th of December 2012, Adam Lanza murdered his mother and 26 other people, including 20 young children at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. What drove this socially inept 20-year-old to commit one of America's most shocking school massacres? And is there anything his mother could have done to stop him in his murderous tracks? Now in his mid-teens, Adam was being homeschooled by his mother, Nancy. But had she made the right choice in isolating him from his peers and the outside world?
Nancy Lanza believed that she could protect her son. I think she saw him as this sweet, fragile genius that needed to be saved from the outside world.
She typically did not have a lot of visitors, probably because of Adam. He liked to keep to himself, and I think with that, she tried to accommodate that aspect of him and, didn't have too many people in the home.
Mental illness is the last frontier of medical science. It's the last frontier of prejudice and stigma.
By now, Adam's family was completely fractured.
Didn't talk to his father, hadn't talked to his father for a couple of years. His father was pretty much out of the picture other than financially. He didn't talk to his brother. Ryan had moved on. He was working in New York. Really came home.
Nancy had completely isolated her son.
There was now no hope that Adam was going to remain attached to people. She was really putting Adam in this seclusion, in this bubble, where his crazy world became the only world.
Completely blocked off from the outside world, Adam is now spending all of his time in his bedroom playing violent video games behind blacked out windows. Despite living in the same house, he and his mother are now only communicating by email.
He was involved in these violent games, and that's all he saw. He saw these games that led to the highest number of shots and the biggest number of kills, and how he could become sort of the master of the kill.
He took his interest in killing very seriously and spent a great deal of time researching mass murderers and spree shooters online.
Editing mass killer entries on Wikipedia, he would take great pains to describe the firearms that these killers used.
How many they killed and when their shootings were and what kind of guns they used.
If some of the entries didn't depict the actual weapon as it was in accuracy, or if it didn't have the correct ammunition tied to the weapon, he edited those entries, and he wanted it to be absolutely accurate.
Adam Lanza is isolated more and more from the normal general community, but he's now found another community. He's found a community of like-minded spree killer enthusiasts. So now he can tell himself, I'm normal. This is what all these people believe in.
But this was far from normal.
It's placing him square in the middle of a really horrible and dangerous reality, which is becoming more real to him than what's outside.
Adam was isolated in his room, door locked, windows blocked with black plastic bags.
Nancy Lanza's denial, in my opinion, has tipped over to the point of being abuse of her son. If you love your child, I could see you having a difficulty accepting his disabilities. But on the other hand, how do you allow him to live in this self-imposed dungeon?
Perhaps Nancy had become frightened of Adam's mental state. His online posts did indicate he was experiencing dark, disturbing thoughts.
In referencing mass shootings at one point, he did say, "I don't question why there are mass shootings. I question why there aren't more mass shootings."
In Adam Lanza's really tortured and twisted mind at that point, the more he thought about it, the more he obsessed about it, the more he was going to have to do it.
Now completely lost in a world of isolation that his mother helped create, Adam was on the edge. Suddenly, Nancy announced she intended to move with Adam to Seattle.
She thought it would be a good move for Adam, perhaps even for herself, to get something new, a fresh start.
Adam Lanza could not do change. Mentally disturbed, autism spectrum people cannot do change. They can't adapt. She didn't discuss this with Adam. He had a cocoon around him, his own little world. And now she was saying to him, adapt, move. That would be a lot for any young person. Adam saw this as cataclysmic. This was something he could not deal with.
On the morning of the 14th of December 2012, 20-year-old Adam Lanza finally reached breaking point.
He fatally shot his mother while she was in her bedroom. And then he got in the car and he drove to Sandy Hook Elementary School, wearing military gear, earplugs, and heavily armed.
The school had a doorway you had to be buzzed in, and so he just shot out the window right next to it and walked in that way.
The first person he encountered was the school principal.
He gunned her down, as well as others, and proceeded to go through the classrooms.
He systematically went into the classrooms that he could get into and just fired as many shots as he could.
He wanted to kill as many people as he possibly could, as many children as he possibly could.
He shot 152 bullets, and then he killed himself.
911 State Police, can I help you?
There's a shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut.
What school, man?
Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown.
Surveyed all 8 cars, surveyed all 8 cars. Be advised, Newtown has an active shooter.
We knew fairly quickly that something bad had happened.
With police units now on the scene at Sandy Hook, the magnitude of what had just occurred began to sink in.
One of our reporters, his daughter was a teacher who was killed. Substitute teacher who was killed.
Police quickly sent units to the Lanza family home.
The doors were locked, no one answered. They actually sent a robot into the house in case it was wired for explosives. And that's when they discovered that Nancy was dead in her bed. She had been shot with a .22 rifle that they found on the ground near her bed.
What caused Adam Lanza to commit such an unspeakable crime? And how much blame can we attribute to his mother, Nancy?
I think Nancy Lanza played an absolutely central role in creating the monster that Adam Lanza would come to be. I think she erected this barrier around him from a very young age. So even when there was the opportunity for other people to intervene and to make things better, they weren't allowed in.
Nancy's proposing to move, which was kind of a sense of destabilizing Adam's life. At the same time, she seems to be retreating from Adam's world, from the monstrous creation that she has molded.
She's gone from being very much attached to Adam and enmeshed with Adam to wanting to really remove herself from that situation. So I think she's getting tired of playing that role as a mother manager, as the person who is looking after this very troubled teenager. She doesn't want to be that person anymore. So she starts looking for an exit plan.
On that day, he decides to go and commit murder.
And the fact that his mother is his first victim, I think, is incredibly significant.
I wonder, now, why wasn't killing his mother sufficient?
I think what's happened here is, in killing his mother, you know, Adam has kind of entered this different reality. This is somebody for whom the line between fantasy and reality is becoming increasingly blurred. And I think when Adam is looking for control, he retreats into that fantasy world. Some of the reports of his behaviour during the shooting spree say that he was behaving in a way similar to a shooter in a violent video game. He was reloading his weapon when he didn't need to reload it because there were bullets already in there. He was quite mechanical and quite controlled. So I think in going and perpetrating this shooting spree, he is kind of immersing himself in fantasy, but unfortunately that fantasy is all too real.
Liz, to what extent do you blame Nancy Lanza for her son's crimes?
Well, I think we can put a lot of responsibility in her hands because I think she constructed the environment in which Adam Lanza, the spree killer, emerged.
The Sandy Hook massacre is a tragedy that will be mourned forever. The horror of 20 young schoolchildren being gunned down in cold blood will never be forgotten.
They had their entire lives ahead of them. Birthdays, graduations, weddings.
Every juncture, something was missed. If the school had referred, if the community psychiatrist had seen this, if the father had become more involved, if.